It's Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Senate Staff Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today in Washington, D.C. with Mr. Bob Redding. A Georgia native, he attended Mercer University in Macon and later received his law degree from the George Washington University Law School here in D.C. Mr. Redding served as an intern for Senator Sam Nunn, a congressional aide to U.S. Representative Charlie Hatcher of Georgia's 2nd Congressional District, and later Chief of Staff for U.S. Senator Wyche Fowler of Georgia. Following his stint on Capitol Hill, Mr. Redding launched a long and successful career in government affairs as founder and principal of the Redding Firm here in Washington. Mr. Redding, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time this beautiful Tuesday morning here in Washington. And thank you, as always, to Randy Knuckles and the folks here at Denton's Washington, D.C. office for hosting us.
Thank you, Ashton, for allowing me to be here.
Oh, we really do appreciate it and appreciate getting your insights read into the record on the Senate Staff Oral History Project. So let's start. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and upbringing. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Blakely, Georgia, Early County, and then my parents lived in Edison, Georgia, which is in Calhoun County, Georgia.
Okay.
And they grew up in that area, and I went to public schools there, and it was a great way of life. We lived in town, and we just went to Edison Baptist Church, played sports, and it was a great quality of life.
What did your folks do?
They were worked in a small business there for years, and then opened a business of their own later in life, and it was successful. And after my father passed away, my mom continued the business and eventually moved to outside of Perry, Georgia, where my sister and her husband live. Okay. And they live today.
So would you say that you grew up in a politically active or attuned family?
Attuned. My mother was quite conservative, and early in life during the Nixon-Watergate period encouraged me strongly. My mom had the strong hand in our family to write a paper defending President Richard Nixon.
Well,
my father went the other way and was on the local city council. You got to remember, this is a town of 1,500 people.
Right.
So the races were not super competitive. But I always loved politics. Part of that early piece for me, I had high school teachers that encouraged it. And if you'll recall, we had 2 newspapers, the Albany Herald, which was a daily, and a weekly, the Calhoun County News.
Were both of those owned by Gray or published by Gray?
Only the Albany Herald.
Right, okay.
Calhoun County News was owned locally.
Okay.
And I read them from front to back, including obituaries. It's a habit I have today with the New York Times and the Washington Post. I go through, even when I'm traveling, it's a habit of reading front to back because they were small papers and you read everything in it. And I kept up with politics. And worked at age 15, 16, worked in Bob Hanner, who later became a state representative from Dawson, Georgia, worked in his first race.
So you worked for Bob Hanner. Would you say you identify more with your mother's politics or your father's politics?
To be candid with you, I mean, it's a conservative area of the state.
Sure.
Everybody was a Democrat. There were no Republicans in that part of Georgia. And my mom had a very strong hand, and Hanner was a Democrat, but conservative, and later flipped to the Republican Party.
That's right.
In office, but sort of trended with most of the people of that era.
Sure. So tell me, what led you to Mercer University?
I was from a small town and had not traveled very much at that time, and it was 2.5 hours or so from Edison, and Willis and Wallace Duval, who were local leaders in our community. Wallace and his wife went to Mercer, and they were missionaries to then Nigeria.
Sure. And strong missionary tradition out of Mercer.
That's right. And our only attorney in Edison, Willis Duval, strongly encouraged it, and he was very popular in our town and church, and so I went there. It was it was a good experience for me. I had in the political science department some strong mentors there.
Were the ties with the Baptist Church still very strong when you attended?
Trending not so much.
Okay,
And,
so
it was right at that
period.
place. Yes.
So this wasn't when John Birch attended the.
No.
This wasn't John Birch's.
No, definitely
immerser.
not. It was trending away from that at the time.
So you studied political science
and economics. I had a double major and a minor in Latin, which does not necessarily serve me well today.
You can pronounce those legal terms.
That's right,
correctly.
but it's a dead language, as you know. Not a lot of call for it, but I did have four very strong professors. The chairman of the department, James Cox, who had politicians in his family over the years, and Russell Locke, and Peggy DuBose, who later I think was on the city council there, and then Dr. Charles Andrews was chair of the economics department. They named a business school for him. So
that's right.
All four of those were prominent figures, and the reason I'm here is Peggy DuBose called me after class and said, Sam Nunn has a intern program through the Georgia Institute of Government, and said you need to apply for it. And I did.
And you did.
That's why I'm here.
So what years were you at Mercer?
74 to 78.
74 to 78. So were you active in politics while you were at Mercer?
I went to, yes, but not right or left.
Sure.
I went to the Democratic Club, College Club, and I went to the Republican College Club, and it was really not motivating in either place. But Russell Locke, who was the only Republican in the political science department, when Ronald Reagan ran the first time for president, came to Macon, and he was at the Macon Mall. And
are we talking 68 or 76?
76.
Okay.
And Dr. Locke asked the class who would like to go to the mall with him to meet Ronald Reagan. It was not a big crowd. And I volunteered, so he and I, no one else, only because there were no other candidates, went to the mall and met Reagan, and it was pretty cool. That was in 76, I guess.
Can you attest to President Reagan's retail politics skills then?
He was quite warm.
I'm sure.
Signed something for me. I don't know where it is now, but he did.
So you signed up for this, or at least applied for the Nunn internship.
Yes.
Got it.
Did not get it.
Did not get
I
it.
was an alternate and crushed.
Yeah.
And I just thought, hey, this is a sign I shouldn't go. Later on, I think the internships started in August. I got a call in July saying the person that did get it in Atlanta had punted, decided to do something else.
Right.
And did I still want to go? The answer was absolutely. So I came to Washington. I'd never been before. I'd never been further north than Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Oh wow.
So when I crossed into South Carolina, I stopped the car, and a young lady who was a press intern for Nunn caught a ride with me. South Georgia boys all have cars, okay? There's nobody without a car.
You have to
have one. You can't get anywhere. So stopped in South Carolina, and I know she thought it was odd. I'd never met her before. She said, why are we stopping? I said, I've never been this far north. And off we go and did the internship.
So what did your internship entail? It's more than obviously fetching the coffee, but
yes, we had a great intern coordinator, Emory Crandall, who later became, I think, controller of the currency. I think that's right. And a great group. Joe Brannon, who's head of the Georgia Bankers, was the state director. Connell Stafford was the political guy in Georgia. All of these people you know. Mm-hmm. Richard Ray was our chief of staff.
Right.
And so we had a really bunch of great people. I probably left some people out.
Sure.
But
was Gordon Giffen on staff?
Gordon Giffen was. Yeah. In fact, at the time, Burt Lance was before the Senate committee. Nunn was on it, not chairing it, on investigations about his financial dealings.
Right.
Gordon was the LA that sat behind him.
Okay.
So Senator Nunn would say, Gordon, go get this, or he had to go to the restroom or get lunch, and they would send me over, and I sat behind Nunn just briefly. On one of those occasions, picture this, we had three or four networks.
Right.
My parents had a TV where they worked. Local community came in to watch, and there I sat. And so, I was 19, 20 years old, and was quite famous at that moment, even though I was just there as a placeholder.
Well, pre-social media,
that
was the only way to be seen.
Yeah. But oddly, my mom, who was very strong and could be tough, she told me, we were very excited to see you on television. She said one problem. She did not like the tie I had on. And, a college student, I had maybe 2 ties. So I got a tie in the mail.
Moms are going to be moms.
Moms are going to be moms.
So, did your job change during that internship, or how did you make that transition from your internship to sort of Washington figure?
It changed dramatically.
Okay.
And we did the typical intern functions. We had some really great trips. Carter was in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Annette Davis Carter had married the youngest Carter, and they were living there. And fortunately, I got to go down there and do a full tour, and it was exciting. But the agricultural legislative assistant left and moved home unexpectedly, and they just dumped that on me, frankly. Georgia was in a part of a southeastern drought disaster. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of loans and programs coming out of the federal government. So I really would answer the phones for farmers and meet with them when they came to Washington. So I really got into that. It was pretty cool. I got a lot more responsibility.
So you were still an intern, but you were
yes.
functioning as an LA,
correct,
a legislative assistant.
With lots of supervision.
So were you ever officially brought on to Senator Nunn's staff?
No, actually I went home. I hadn't finished college yet.
Right, that's right.
I went back to Mercer, and I was offered a position, but the timing just was not right to go back.
Okay.
Yes.
So that gap in time, what were you doing? You finished up at Mercer.
Mercer. I worked on Charlie Hatcher's campaign.
Okay.
And Charlie Hatcher, huge Democratic field. Dawson Mathis left to run against Senator Talmadge.
Right. So
Zell
1980.
Miller. That's right. Yeah. And as Mathis said, the polls showed that Senator Talmadge could be beaten.
Sure.
It just didn't show that he could beat them. And we laughed about that. But anyway, Dawson left to run. His chief of staff, Julian Holland, was in the primary. Hatcher, a local state rep and assistant floor leader of the House. And remember, George Busby was governor.
That's right.
Hatcher, from Albany, so Hatcher and Busby very tight.
Sure.
Hatcher and Holland went into a runoff. Hatcher won the runoff. And I think there was a Republican candidate, but they didn't score.
How did you wind up on Charlie Hatcher's campaign as opposed to Mr. Holland's campaign?
I met Charles. He came up with an attorney from Baker County who represented a lot of farmers.
Bad Baker.
And Charles was a native of Baker and came to Washington, and I met them over some casework. Farmers that could not get a loan, or at that time, if I recall correctly, it was a lot of gray areas relative to small businesses in rural communities and whether or not they qualified for agricultural disaster assistance from SBA. And there were 2 programs.
So this is SBA, so Small Business Administration, then you had all the USDA, Farmers Home Administration.
And that's how I met Charles, and he was great and worked on his campaign. And it was, he had, I thought about this when we first heard from you. He had a team of boys. He paid us all the same amount and gave us all the same title. He hired a leadership team, tax counsel from the Georgia General Assembly, Dr. Cantor Brown, and Bobby Avery, who was a senior staffer for Senator Talmadge, who had been beaten by Mac Mattingly.
Right.
So that was our team. And these boys, we all lived together. Tim Golden, later minority leader of the Georgia State Senate, DOT. I may be on the DOT.
I think he was commissioner of DOT at some point.
Mark Sanders, who's a lobbyist in Atlanta. And Bill Adams, who later went on Clinton administration as press secretary at DOT. And Harry McDougal, who ended up practicing law in Atlanta. He was from Atlanta.
So this is an aside, but it's something that I always notice when folks, there are pictures of Congressman Hatcher. Did he always have white hair?
No. It was a grayish white, but he was a good mentor. We had I will tell you this, very smart. He is very smart. And he and Whites were very different styles. And but Charles, in small group meetings, there was none better. He was warm. He took notes, very gracious, and particularly with that district at the time, it was huge, like 36 counties.
Right.
And the counties were very rural, much more agrarian at that point.
Sure.
And so dependent on agriculture, and it was really the right person at that time.
So, would you describe? I think you intimated what the answer is going to be, but would you describe him as a natural politician?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I would.
Now, what about his politics? Is it sort of that sort of?
Charles was, of course, at that time we had the boll weevils. The Georgia delegation was slammed with boll weevils. White's was not. But we had Doug Bernard, Jenkins, Ed Jenkins, Lindsey. We had Bogan first, then Lindsey Thomas, and but during that period that I worked in the House, and several others. Roy from Dr.
Roy Rowland.
Roy Rowland from Dublin.
Just passed away not too long ago.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And there was a group of those guys, and we the boll weevils then were 100, 150 plus members compared to correlate that with the Blue Dogs now. It's very different. But a good delegation. Charles probably, this is just my view, slid on the more moderate than that group.
The more moderate of the
boll weevils, yes.
Boll weevil Democrats.
But we had a lot on us. Reagan was very popular in the 2nd District, and there were a number of budget and tax bills that the boll weevils went for. Graham Ladder 1 and 2, I think, and other things that a number of groups in the district.
Those being the tax reform bills.
Correct. And the committee, the district, probably it was not the most popular for some. It was very divided. And but the boll weevils pretty much stuck together.
Right. So the parties being much more ideologically diverse back in those days.
Yes.
The conservatives and liberals in both parties.
That's right.
So, what would you say? The nature of your work was. You said with none, you had a bunch of ag stuff dropped on you. Was that the sort of same tack that you took up with Congressman Hatcher?
I got it again, and I had helped with. At that time, you did barbecues and fish fries. A lot of events.
Right.
A lot of the PAC money doesn't roll in for a 17 candidate field or whatever the number was for people that never worked in Washington. So once we got to Washington, typically there'd be a couple of a couple of big PAC events in Washington, and then we did these grand events in Georgia, cattle calls, as we call them. And so I did all the fundraising. Eventually was the legislative director and chief of staff for Congressman Hatcher, and had an interim hiccup in there in that Dawson Mathis decided to run again for his seat, in our second term. And was polling ahead of us, so we had some issues. But Congressman Hatcher at that point called me in and said, "I've got some good news and bad news." He said, "The good news is I really trust you to go home and manage my race. The bad news is you're going home." And so I went off the payroll and went back to Albany and lived during that period. And it was a tough, rough race. We had some really strong negative ads. We went negative. Negative radio was a big deal then. And,
sure.
We had a lot.
Why do you think Congressman Hatcher, who was a freshman, why do you think he was able to fend off that challenge from Dawson Mathis?
Mathis had some baggage, and Charles had built some really strong personal relationships. Still on the tail end of a pretty significant disaster in the Southeast with agriculture. And the ag leaders stuck with us from even then. Dairy wasn't big in our district, it's hardly existent in the district now, but South Georgia. But we had dairy, they were with us and very financially helpful. Peanut, cotton, all of the ag guys lined up and stood with us. But it was a very tight race.
Sure.
I don't remember the exact number, but it was
a lot
tight.
of name recognition for Congressman Mathis.
And Dawson had been on television with the Gray Communications all those years, and he made his bones in the flood the big flood
Right.
during that period. He was on TV every day.
Was that Flint River?
Flint River, but it flooded all those counties down around Albany. And Dawson was on TV every night with the people. And he and I later became good friends, but he was a really popular figure.
Sure. So how much interaction as a House staffer did you have with Senate staffs at the day, either Senator Nunn or Senator Mattingly's staff?
Very limited.
Sure.
We stayed in touch, of course, knew several of the staffers on ag issues. Senator Nunn was very open and confident enough that he was inclusive, and that was very popular with House members. I'm not so sure that happens in all cases now, but at that time, Senator Nunn, typically on ag issues, would consult with Hatcher if it was a big deal, farm bill kind of stuff, or big credit packages, and Senator Mattingly some too. Yeah, we did with the senators from Georgia.
With Herman Talmadge out of the Senate, I assume there would be a lot of deference to then those House districts that were impacted.
He was very powerful then, but Talmadge was.
So what would you say and obviously this is Bob Redding's opinion, the most important accomplishments that Congressman Hatcher had while you were on his staff?
He was very involved in the establishment of the Conservation Reserve Program, which is there today, and has a new look today, and not so much reform as a new spin relative to some of the climate, agricultural conservation climate issues, and planting of trees and other things. And very involved with that, and certainly involved in the economies of that district at the time with farm programs, peanut, cotton, and then tobacco. It was still alive, and Georgia had 20 plus tobacco auction houses, and his district was covered with them.
I was not aware that tobacco was that big.
Oh, it was very
industry
big
in that district.
Moultrie, Valdosta, Ashburn, all of that area.
So Camilla, Mitchell County. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So, how do you go from Charlie Hatcher, 2nd Congressional District, to Wyche Fowler, 5th Congressional District?
Well, a lot of these names you will know from a different space.
Okay.
But at the time, Susan Kahn worked for Wyche, and she did agriculture, even though he had, primarily Fulton County, but an urban district. And he was, as he liked to describe, an urban cat. And Susan,
the nightmare of
Atlanta. Right. This was pre-Bobby, transitioning into Bobby Kahn coming into Susan's life. But Susan and I were friends, and when you go through multiple cycles in the House, particularly contentious race and all, it was time to learn some new things. Okay. And there was a heck of a lot of excitement when Wyche won. And Charles had been very open, primary and general, in support of Wyche.
So this would have been 1986?
Correct.
Okay.
And basically when Wyche went below Macon, I typically would be involved in those visits. And of course, not on the House time.
The show, of course.
All volunteer,
of course.
Period.
Of course.
But Charles had really encouraged Wyche to run, and they were good friends, and we went all over South Georgia together, had some very good conversations, and very, very fun conversations.
Without getting into confidences and details, what were those kind of conversations and experiences like for a city cat from Atlanta coming down south of the fall line?
He was very observant and knew that he was not likely going to hunt with one of these guys that we were meeting with, let's say a group, go hunting and hang out all night with them talking about agriculture. But he was very warm, gracious, and Wyche is one of the smartest guys I know, and really did well with crowds, small groups, and we did a lot of them. We went all over South Georgia, and he's a great storyteller, as you know, and he told a lot of good stories. I hope they were all true, but he he really did a great job. And our role really, when I was with Charles, we just really connected him with stronger leaders, and had a very positive response. And part of that was the intro by Charles, and part of it was Weitsch's personality.
Had you had, apart from obviously him being serving in the House along with your boss, had you had much interaction with Mr. Fowler before this?
No more than any other member. It was just, nothing intimate. Susan Kahn and I were good friends, and Bill Johnston and I became friends, and Bill was his ledge director or chief at that time, I don't remember. And Bill was really all things Weitsch as far as running the races and all that, his races, and that was really my connection.
How would you describe his brand of politics, maybe vis-a-vis Charlie Hatcher's?
Weitsch was head on, and you dump him out, and you might have had a tough conversation about how bad this meeting could be, and how this crowd might not be warm, but he was very brave, and you'd have a tough moment, and then he'd open that door, and he was good, and really great politician, and honestly, what was probably the most, in hindsight, and even in that period, heartbreaking period when he lost to Senator Coverdell, was that he had not peaked yet, and his skills and thought processes and openness to both working with, moderate Democrats, liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans. He and Phil Graham were good friends. Rudy Boschwitz from Minnesota, when he was there, they were good friends. He was just really talented. And George Mitchell had really taken Weitsch under his wing, and Tom Daschle during that period. And that whole class that came in '87 were some real powerhouses. And Weitsch was certainly a star during that period.
What issues were, obviously when you're a senator you have to represent all the constituents in Georgia, but what issues were front and center and really close to Senator Fowler's heart?
He was very interested in the ag rural space. If you'll recall, during that period, Dems were in control of the Senate. Pat Leahy from Vermont became the new chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, and one of his top priorities was, and actually number one at that time, was rural development. And Ashton, you will appreciate these names. John Podesta, later Chief of Staff for President Clinton and for Barack Obama. I think he's still doing some part-time work maybe at the White House now. John left the Senate Judiciary Committee and became counsel for Senate Ag.
Oh, really?
During that period for Senator Leahy. But during that period, they wanted to do rural development hearings. They, at the time, decided the first hearing for the Senate Ag Committee, pre-Farm Bill, that would have been the '90 Farm Bill, would be in Moultrie, Georgia, and it would be on rural development. And so Senator Leahy, Weitsch was very excited about it, and we planned it. And then as we got closer, Chairman Leahy said, one nuance, to get a full feel of what's going on in the ag and rural development space, we will be staying with local families, not in a hotel.
No.
So we had a dozen senators in Colquitt County, and the hotel situation was not great then, now it is, staying in homes. And Fowler was not excited about that. And anyway, we worked it out for him, but it was quite a show, and we met in what is now I believe this is right, the Colquitt County Arts Center. It was a school then. It's now an arts center in Moultrie, but we had a hearing then. I may have that wrong on the exact location, but had the first hearing for the '90 Farm Bill was in Moultrie on rural development.
So I grew up in Southern Illinois, an agricultural state. And I can remember as a young kid, my grandfather was in the fertilizer business, Standard Oil, Amoco, and the farm crisis of the 80s and early 90s, was that something that was on your radar as somebody who had worked in ag with Representative Hatcher, and that carried over into your work with Senator Fowler?
Yes, we had protected the farm programs. The Southern commodities were a lot of supply and management type programs, quota programs, and our goal was to keep those healthy, and we did. And it was hard. A lot of floor votes at that time. Rick Santorum, for example, went after peanuts later, up to 8 votes on one bill from Santorum only. So there were a lot of, from Pennsylvania, there was a lot of activity on Southern farm programs, but it was to protect those programs primarily. So
when you came on staff, were you chief of staff initially?
No, I was executive assistant, and then I inherited additional responsibilities after being there, and
a victim of your own success.
And Senator Fowler's management style. I will let others describe that, but
no. You're here now, Bob.
Right.
How would you describe Senator Fowler's?
I want to be careful
because
I don't want any payback for Senator Fowler, but he dipped in and out, and you would pick up responsibilities as you moved around. And eventually, Bill went on a sabbatical and went down to do politics, and I was chief of staff after that. And it was great. I kept the ag space. I had help, but it was great. He was also on ag appropriations, which Senator Cochran later did that at the same time.
So ag appropriations, is that through appropriations?
Correct.
Okay.
And
just want to get
so
that
he's
right.
on the Senate Ag Committee and Senate Ag Appropes. And Cindy Hyde-Smith does that now from Mississippi. And it is a great way to do business as far as political business and legislation because you really have two paths. And at the time, earmarks were still alive. And
I hear they're back now. So
in a lesser form. But Senator Fowler, we also inherited the Olympics.
So, So 90 on, that would have been.
The Olympics wore us out on money. So
what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
We, even though the Olympics raised a ton of money, the bulk of it, there was some federal money that went down there, and we were tasked with working on a lot of that, and it was a lot of activity.
So how much interaction did you have with Senator Nunn's staff during this period? Was this a closer relationship than you would have had in Representative Hatcher's office, for example?
Yes. Very good with the legislative staff and also with the chief of staff for Senator Nunn. It was, tough votes. We discussed it before. If you'll recall, there was Clarence Thomas then was going through the confirmation process, and that was a fragile period because Georgia was quite divided on that with interest groups.
Sure.
And I believe this is right. You could have to ask Weitz this, but I believe Senator Nunn and Senator Fowler introduced Clarence Thomas at the hearing, and
that would have certainly been tradition.
Very
at that
much
time.
Tradition. All of that was an interesting period to work, but there were other periods too. But we did talk a lot. At least we knew, not that they would always vote alike, but we knew up front, and they were generally transparent with us. And Nunn's popularity was always off the charts.
Sure.
And so it was a good relationship.
I think the Clarence Thomas hearings was probably the first domestic issue I remember growing up. And in Illinois, that was a major thing because, name you'll recognize, Alan Dixon had voted in favor, and that caused a huge stir within the Democratic Party of Illinois.
Right.
And that's how Carol Moseley Braun, the first African-American woman senator, and she was defeated in '98 by Peter Fitzgerald, and then 2004, Peter Fitzgerald retires, and a guy named Barack Obama.
Right.
So it all goes back to the Clarence Thomas hearings.
Right.
And obviously, Senator Fowler and Senator Nunn both voted
Yes.
to confirm.
Yes.
And it was a very close vote. So those are the kind of things that you would have been as chief of staff, you would have been across, or at least
during that
you would have been
period.
read into all of those.
And gun control was also big
Sure.
during that period. And Georgia was very divided. And the Democratic Party at that time, leadership, I believe this is right, I'm not positive on this, was certainly supportive of some form. And Georgia interest groups were quite divided. And it's indicative of, for political figures to look within trade associations, because it's not just that the Sheriff's Association or the district attorneys supported something. It's who's their leadership and where are they from, and I'll put it to you as at that time the largest peanut grower in Georgia put it after the vote for, I don't remember the exact bill, but it was a gun control bill. The best peanut program in the world won't negate a gun control vote, and that was a comment at that time. And I don't know if whites will remember this, but I do. We were riding from South Georgia back to Atlanta.
Okay.
This was during the re-elect. And at the time, Charlton Heston was either president or been president of the National Rifle Association. So we're booking it back from South Georgia and listening to I believe it was a Thomasville, Georgia radio station. I think he was physically in Georgia during the, I guess, the general election runoff.
He being Charlton Heston.
Correct. And he came on and he's doing an interview, and you'll love this. He said, came on and said in that voice, I won't try to do it, but White Fowler is trying to take your guns. And White cut the radio off and said, how can I win? Said, even Moses has taken opposition, and which was quite colorful.
So one of the knocks against Senator Mattingly in 1986 was that he didn't go home enough, that he was, pejoratively, that he was the senator from Georgetown. Did Senator Fowler take that into account during his time in office? Was he a regular back in the state?
Yes, and I will use this example. Bill had a giant board in his office with town meetings, and to do them in every county, I don't remember, maybe each 2-year cycle. Mm-hmm. And we did them, a lot of town meetings, and they were stacked during the day, and White was dutiful about going. And these town hall meetings, now most are done over the internet, but then at the time they were in person, and we had them. And different staffers, like I would go when it was like rural Georgia, middle or South Georgia, and then other staffers in urban or other towns where there were issue areas for them, legislative issue areas. And they were fun, but there were a lot of them. There are a lot of counties in that state.
159.
Right. And I would not want to be the legislature or governor trying to change that number, but
and they tried.
Yes.
Well, Kill Townsend tried, and
that's right.
Some others
didn't last long. But anyway, so the town hall meetings are just an example. But he was determined to be as much as possible in all these communities, and there was a strategy to that effect where regions of the state were not left out of of him personally being there.
So what was it? It's not a fair question, but I'll ask it. What was a typical day at work for you as chief of staff in White Fowler's office there in the late 80s, early 1990s?
Well, I go in early, and just go in early, get started, and then you are, I'd been around for a while with particularly the ag community. You get a lot of calls, and you push off some that can be done by other people, and we had a team, you probably know them, in our communications area, Chuck Searcy from Athens, who's a longtime figure, and I think chained himself to Dr. Fred Davidson's desk over the Vietnam War. Chuck's in Hanoi now, so he probably won't see this. But
oh, we can make sure he does.
Steve Humphreys, and then a young lady who later went on PR firm Ellett. I can't remember Ellen's last name, but they were our communications section, and we got a lot of energy from them. And so there was always a frequent drop by for ideas, and it was sort of the war room, and you knew that if you went by there, they were always looking for action, and you bounced ideas off. Some of them were not ready for prime time, but we'd get filtered and eventually get to Weich. But that involved a lot, and meetings covering for him when he couldn't do something.
Mm-hmm. So, I think you already said head on or direct, but how would you describe Weich Fowler as a boss, as an administrator? I know it was your job to run the office, but boss is still
during
boss.
During that period that I was chief, he gives you a lot of responsibility, but there was a clear message not to screw up, and he was he was very direct. You did not mince words, and there wasn't like a lot of hanging out time. And I made a mistake early working for him, and that there was a banking bill on the floor, and we were at the time, you may remember this history, but pre-Bank of America, Nations Bank, I think there were NCNB of North Carolina,
right,
and CNS Bank of Atlanta. And NCNB was really moving to take over CNS Bank. Mm-hmm. CNS did not want it. They hired a law firm here in town, not this one, and our conference room was basically their war room, and we were working with Atlantans to block it.
So this was a hostile takeover.
Oh gosh, yes, it was very hostile.
Very hostile.
Later
takeover.
Became very friendly, and they did it, but
well,
not,
sure.
It was
right.
a little early,
right?
But it was quite active during the weeks in the lead up to the floor vote. Anyway, we were successful in our amendment and blocked it, and I'll never forget. And I did it. I was guilty of it. A reporter called from the Columbus paper and said, well, I don't think this is a Wire report, I think it's a Columbus Inquirer, and said, well, that amendment really didn't do anything, did it? And I went for it hook, line, and sinker and said, why, we drew blood on this one. Well, unfortunately, it ran, and that day, I flew back with Senator Fowler to Atlanta for something, and I had to ride with him down.
Captive audience.
He, let's just say I had a PhD about how to watch commentary to the media, and it was I did learn from those days. He was great, warm, smart, and I learned a lot from him.
How much interaction did you have? Now, obviously, you had to run the office here in Washington, but how much interaction daily did you have with the re-election campaign?
At that
in
time,
92,
not
sorry.
really. I was not. My only connection with that is, and you got to picture this. It was a different environment then,
sure,
particularly relative to raising money. In the Senate, I believe at that time, 3 people could take checks or campaign contributions who were on staff. They
okay.
were designees, political designees. And I was one of those.
Okay.
So on my time, I worked with our fundraisers. We had a lady in Atlanta who was really good with that, and we had a consultant from New York, and we raised a lot of money, and had money left over. We didn't have enough votes, but we had the cash. And
that's a cardinal sin of campaigning.
That's right. But we, that was really my only involvement, and I went down toward the end.
Sure.
But my job was just to help raise the money, and we had a really good team, particularly the Harriet Moldauer, I believe, I got the last name right, did it in Atlanta, and she worked really hard, very dedicated, and she had a team of staff that worked, and it worked well for us.
Now, obviously, you wanted your boss to succeed for that reason, but you're professionally invested in re-election as well. What was your reaction when Now, obviously, the Republicans had a very contentious primary campaign. Bob Barr and John Knox of Waycross were running, and Coverdell won the initial primary, won the runoff against Barr, I believe.
I think that's right.
And then the general election is running, and then there's a runoff. What was your reaction on that 92 election, which of course Bill Clinton had won, so you have those sort of mixed outcomes in Georgia. What was your reaction?
Well, two Democratic senators, I think this is right, Weich and Terry Sanford of North Carolina, lost, and I was crushed. I thought we'd win the general election runoff. I was concerned,
Sure.
and we had a meeting of our major contributors in Atlanta right after the election, and I think it was Connell Stafford that said this. And after Weich had left and the campaign team had left, I was still there to get the pledges, and I'll never forget. He said, Coca-Cola's going to do everything we can financially to give, but he said, this is not good, and we knew it. So
Connell had been around long enough.
He knew, and but we put up a good fight. It was a good election, and as far as the race, it was we worked hard. Bill Johnstone was the campaign manager, and Bill's very smart. Won awards for political consulting prior to that, but it was tough, and getting people to go back to the polls, Democrats, was really hard. Yeah.
Bill Johnstone versus Tom Perdue.
That's right.
It was a showdown.
Tough. It was a showdown.
It's a knife fight.
Clinton sent in some of his team, but
Al Gore came to Athens with Michael Stipe.
Yes. Oh yes, we had
and Kim Basinger. Actually,
we had a lot of that, and but it was just not enough to get it over the line, and it was hard.
Why do you think Senator Fowler came up short? If you had to identify votes or contextual causes.
This is just my opinion. I don't know that Weich or Bill would agree with this. Probably gun control and the Clarence Thomas deal. And the reason I say that, it muted the passion for Democratic
support.
Passion. Let me use this example that will explain it. The morning after the general election runoff, when it was done, we had plane tickets and to go back to Washington. It was a sad morning.
Sure.
And we took a cab together with Bill was in it, I believe, myself and Senator Fowler, and the driver of the taxi booking it to Atlanta Airport said, somebody in there, it might have been me, it might have been Weich or Bill, said, "What'd you think about the election last night?" And he said it was tragic. He said, "I voted against Fowler in the general election to send him a message, but I never dreamed that he would lose." And Weich said very directly, "He heard you." So it was tough, but it happens.
Right. So what was the lame duck session like in your office?
It was
It seems like it'd be very hard to get motivated to get things done.
Painful. I don't remember a lot about it. We had,
Sure.
I don't remember how they did the allocations for everything legal pass, the stationery, but we basically put all our supplies in the conference room, and other members came and took them, and it was hard. And my wife had been chief of staff for Richard Ray, and he had lost too. So we were both unemployed with a new baby and a new mortgage. So it was game on.
Oof. So, wow. How much interaction or during the sort of handoff to Senator Coverdell did you have with his incoming chief of staff to say, here's the constituent work, the case mail that's open, ongoing? Was there any of that?
No, not really that I remember. I will tell you, I talked to Senator Coverdell on a flight right not too long after the election, and he was very kind, very gracious, and had a very good relationship with him. And subsequent chiefs of staff, Molly Dye and Alex Albert and I are still today very good friends.
Alex sat in that seat not too long ago.
He's great.
Yeah, and this is obviously Ashton's opinion, but Paul Coverdell is one of those sort of generational minds when it came to political party building.
Yes.
Senate career is sort of a separate thing from my research and study, but did you, back to the issue of being unemployed with a mortgage and a child, did you consider moving off, seeking employment in another Senate office, House office, or what was that?
I was not ready to go
that
yet.
coping mechanism.
Yes.
What was that
and
process
I
like?
did talk to two members, and at the time, and just the more I thought about it, my wife was Laura, went back to the Hill after maybe 6 months or a year off for a Texas member from Fort Worth, but at the time, I just, I had responsibilities, and I was contacted by a couple of folks that in Georgia and went to work for them. And Peanuts, and then there were others, but it was Peanuts, I think, was the very first one.
So this is the origin of the Reading firm.
Correct.
So I mean, it's sort of a natural thing for you to take on those, the peanut producer. I don't know if it's the Georgia peanut producers or
Commission.
Excuse me. I should know. I get enough free peanuts when I'm in D.C. I should know that name, which is why they gave them away. So how did the business build from there? Were you conscious of not becoming an ag specific or an ag boutique firm?
Absolutely. I wanted some balance because I was quite hungry during that period, and a gentleman who had been a retired Air Force colonel, and he had been an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission. He worked for Phil Hart as an antitrust counsel for the Hart Building.
Michigan Center, I believe. Yeah.
Called me up and said, his name was Don Randall, and he said, I'm retiring. And he said, I'm from Vidalia, Georgia, and I got your name from Richard Ray, who was basically doing defense work in a boutique kind of thing. And he said that Richard does not want to do this, and they've interviewed a bunch of people for this client, and would you be interested? And when you're hungry, Ashton, the answer is always yes. And at that time, I met with them, and they were a small business group out of Dallas, Fort Worth area, and they were automotive aftermarket repair shop owners, collision and mechanical.
Okay.
And we'd been on the energy committee. I knew the clean air stuff, generally, and with lobbyists, as you know, it's a matter of just getting enough and asking enough questions and one-pagers. And at that time, I got them, and then it started growing.
So, and have they been a client?
The entire time. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Is that something that's common with government affairs lobbyists, that you get a client and you stay with?
I don't know. I deal mostly on a handshake. It's old school. There were a lot of independents when I first started, and I like that model. I had my wife quickly got pregnant with twins, and so we had 3 young children, and it was I toyed with going into larger firms, and really got close one time, and with partners, but I was concerned about my kids played sports, and I wanted to go to as much as possible and control my time. And you don't control your time all the time because there are meetings and stuff, but generally had control for those kind of things, and it worked to my advantage.
How did you? People talk about the revolving door and things like that. How? And sort of getting beyond the cliches or the caricatures. How how did you apply your experiences as a House and Senate staffer to your career in lobbying and government affairs?
Well, as I said when I started, I was very, concerned about the future, and Senator Mitchell was Majority Leader, and we had one staffer a young woman who had helped me with fundraising, had not found employment yet, and so I went over and met with his team, and Senator Mitchell was in the queue for re-elect, and he did not take political action money. It was strictly individual contributions, and they asked me if I wanted to help do his fundraising, which I never said no. My wife would argue I don't say no now, but so I formed a separate corporation to do fundraising, and it ended up grew too much. I eventually had to stop it, but I had a lot of candidates. I actually had Senator Shelby when he switched parties, and at the time when he switched, I'll never forget that conversation. His consultants, at least the ones I was familiar with, the Democratic consultants quit, and Senator Shelby asked me, was I leaving? I said, absolutely not. And so I kept him, and it was fun for a cycle, but I don't know if that answered your question, but I used a lot of that fundraising initially, and meeting members and other lobbyists and people that contribute, and was able to build a firm.
So, this issue with Senator Shelby sort of gets to the point. Is some lobbyists are Democratic lobbyists, and some are Republicans. It seems like what you're saying is that you, maybe even going back to your experience with your mom and dad, was able to navigate both sides of the aisle as a government affairs lobbyist.
I've always worked both sides, but I came out of an environment where Republicans and Democrats worked together. Tip O'Neill, as you know, was Speaker,
Sure.
Bob Michael, Minority Leader, and they were close, and it was an environment we worked with others. The Senate was more contentious at that time between the parties, but still, I know I had relationships with a lot of Republican senators, from Trent Lott eventually to Phil Graham, and he were close. Graham was born in Columbus, Georgia.
Right.
And they had a lot of the interests, Boschwitz, and there were others, that he worked with. Cochran always was bipartisan. And it was, so I really came out of the environment in which is harder today, but I still work both sides.
I think harder today is a very generous take on the current climate. But how has lobbying changed since you got, I guess, almost 30 years now?
Yeah.
How has that industry evolved along with sort of the Senate and the House?
Two things stand out to me, or three things really, I guess. All the attacks on the Capitol members' offices over the years have made things more restrictive, and for people like me, when they're in session, I like being over there at least Tuesday through Thursday, and as things, and we got more into January 6th and COVID, and things were really restrictive, it really tied your hands. Turnover in offices, not just member turnover, but staff turnover is more prevalent than ever before, and that's changed it a lot. And the reliance on, and my clients, we use it too, but more reliance on more of a web-based advocacy sort of dilutes the in-person. And the final piece, the continued trend of dominance of fundraising, member time is spent, that they have to spend doing that.
Dial for dollars.
Yeah, it's off the charts, and I don't think anybody likes it, but it's there's no option than that now.
You mentioned the attacks and things like that, and I wanted to get your reflections and your thoughts on as somebody who worked on the Hill as a House and Senate staffer, but also somebody who works in the Hill as a lobbyist on the January 6th attack. Did you watch it on TV, or were you there? What was your reaction?
Well, my office is on the Senate side, and I live on the House side.
So you live in the Capitol Hill
yes.
neighborhood.
I live after our family and kids graduated college and all. We bought a house on the House side. Mm-hmm. So that day I was in the office, and it looked fairly routine. People coming in to the Capitol area, and I guess going down for the speech or whatever. But it was difficult. I sent my team home 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon when things started getting really bad, and went home. And it was very difficult to watch. You work there, you have hold it in high regard, and it was very sad.
Well, what's your take on the January 6th committee and the attempts to sort of grapple with what happened politically in the aftermath?
Well, I know Chairman Thompson well. I hunt with him and really appreciate him. But it just, all that's really difficult to follow up. And I don't know how this plays out. I know the Capitol security issue certainly is more cautious and on guard now, prepared, maybe that's a better phrase. But I have to tell you, the opening up in this 118th Congress, opening up of the buildings is, I feel strongly that's a positive thing. And we really needed that. Mm-hmm. It's healthy for the country. And I think members and staff, I'm not speaking for them, but at least the ones I know really like it.
Yeah, I know. I guess it would have been last summer, when we were visiting some of the members of the Georgia delegation, their offices for work with the Russell Library. You had to call ahead. Staffer had to come. It was very, very foreign to the experience. It used to be walk through the metal detectors and then just walk the halls. Go get. And that was very much not the case. Right. You had to get an escort down to the gift shop to get a stuffed animal for the kid.
Right.
And so just wrapping up, would you recommend to young people, say a sophomore, junior, senior at Mercer, that getting involved as a congressional Senate staffer, that's a worthy career to pursue, or at least a worthy opportunity to take or to pursue?
Absolutely. It is educational in its most basic function. It broadens kids, and particularly from kids from rural areas that have not had maybe any access to this. It presents a lot of opportunities. Encouraged three of my children interned, and one of them works on the House side now, Robert, for a Georgia member, which is fun for me. But no, I would absolutely encourage it, and I appreciate those that encourage me.
Mm-hmm. So, still working full-time, Bob?
Yes. Full-time.
Full-time?
All in, as my wife says.
That's right. Well, anything else you'd like to record for posterity's sake?
I would like to share this. I thought about this. When I had completed my internship, I believe Herman Talmadge attended a Sam Nunn rally for students. And Senator Nunn, I saw him recently. He's one of my Pecan Grower Association members. He's a pecan grower. But during that student rally in Perry, Georgia, Pecan Grove, a Nunn Pecan Grove, Senator Talmadge made his remarks, and like a lot of members, was leaving. He's headed out of there. He was either chairman of ag or chairman of finance at that time. And I said, I need more than this. So I ran after him, and I wanted to work here. And he had a couple of aides with him. So he's getting in the passenger seat, and I blocked him closing the door because I wanted my question. And I said, Mr. Chairman, I told him my name. He could have cared less. And I said, what would you advise a young man who wanted to do well in Washington? And he looked at me and had a cigar in his mouth, and he said, cut the lights on and cut the lights off. And he said, now get out of my door. And he slammed it, and that was my advice.
What was your before we end, what was your interpretation of that?
I was very disappointed, and I reported to my mother, who could really spin things in a positive light. She was very positive, and she explained to me what a great thing to share with a young person, that he was to go in early and stay late.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Bob, thank you so much for your time and for your reflections on your time in and out of government.
Thank you, Ashton,
really do
very
appreciate
much.
it. Thank you so much.